The wind never seemed to rest on the Callahan ranch. It whistled through the cottonwoods, rattled the barn doors, and sighed against the windows of the old farmhouse, like it too mourned with the man who lived inside. Rhett Callahan rose before dawn every day, just as he always had, his movements steady and wordless. Feed the horses, check the fences, count the cattle. It was a life built on habit now, because habits didn't hurt the way memories did. His daughter Ellie was the only bright thing that kept the silence from swallowing him whole. She was 6 years old, with curls the color of wheat and eyes too full of questions he didn't know how to answer. Every morning she'd follow him around the porch in her worn boots that used to belong to her mother, clutching a little tin lunchbox and humming tunes only a child could still remember. "Papa, Mama liked sunrises too, didn't she?" she'd ask sometimes, looking up at the pink horizon. Rhett would nod, throat tight. She surely did, and that was that. He couldn't say more, not without hearing her laugh echoing in his head, not without seeing her hands in every room of the house. Grace Callahan had been gone 3 years now, taken by fever in a week that had started with rain and ended with the world collapsing. Rhett had buried her under the oak tree behind the house, where the grass grew soft and the wind carried the scent of lilac in spring. He hadn't spoken much since. The neighbors in town whispered that Rhett had turned to stone. Hard-working, but hollow, they said. The ranch is running, but the man ain't. And they were right. He did everything for Ellie, her school lessons, her food, her clothes, but love had become something quiet and careful, not spoken, only shown through the steady rhythm of his days. Still, Ellie had her own kind of hope. She kept her mother's old scarf, a faded blue thing that still carried the faintest trace of rosewater, and she talked to it like it was magic. Sometimes Rhett would find her sitting under the oak, wrapping it around her shoulders, whispering stories. She said she'd send someone to help you. "Papa," Ellie told him one evening as he fixed a broken gate, "someone to make you smile again." Rhett had smiled at that, a sad, crooked thing that barely reached his eyes. "Your mama already sent me what I needed, sweetheart," he said, brushing her cheek. "That's you." But Ellie had shaken her head, certain in that innocent way children often are. "No, Papa, someone else is coming." "You'll see." Rhett didn't have the heart to argue. Maybe it was easier to let her believe that her mother was watching over them. Maybe, deep down, he wanted to believe it too. Life on the ranch didn't leave much time for wishes anyway. The drought had been cruel that summer, the herd thinner, the wells lower. Every day was a test of endurance, and Rhett was good at endurance. But when the long autumn wind began to carry the first scent of rain, even he couldn't ignore the weariness pressing against his chest. On the evening that changed everything, the sky was heavy with storm clouds. Rhett was riding back from the south pasture when lightning cracked across the plains, and in that flash of white he saw movement on the road, a lone rider, hunched and struggling to control a panicked horse. By the time he reached her, the animal had thrown its rider into the mud. The woman's bonnet was torn, her hands bleeding, her voice hoarse from shouting. "Please, my horse fell. I can't make it to town." Rhett reined in beside her, rain soaking through his hat, and for a long moment he just stared. Something about her face, tired, frightened, but gentle, made the world go still. That night, for the first time in years, the Callahan ranch would have a stranger under its roof. And Rhett Callahan's quiet, predictable life would never be the same again. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the plains like 1,000 drumming hooves. Rhett Callahan swung down from his horse, boots sinking into the mud, eyes fixed on the figure struggling to stand. The woman's cloak was soaked through, clinging to her like a second skin, and her hair, dark and heavy, fell loose around her face. She blinked up at him through the storm, shivering, her lips trembling as she spoke. "Please, I was headed west. My horse slipped. He's hurt." Her voice was soft, cultured, not the sound of a drifter or a ranch hand. Rhett looked toward the limping horse a few paces away, breathing hard and holding up one leg. The poor creature wouldn't make it another mile. "You're a long way from town, ma'am," Rhett said, his deep voice almost swallowed by the thunder. "You won't get far on foot in this storm." She nodded, teeth chattering. "I didn't mean to trespass. I just needed shelter." Rhett hesitated. For years he'd kept to himself. No guests, no strangers, no new faces in the house that still carried his wife's scent in the curtains. But the rain was unrelenting, and even a man with a wounded heart couldn't turn away someone half frozen on the roadside. "Come on," he said gruffly. You can stay at my place till the weather clears. He helped her to her feet and led the horse by its reins as they rode double back toward the ranch. The woman kept quiet, clutching his coat against the cold, her head bowed. The only sound was the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves against the soaked ground and the distant rumble of thunder rolling across the valley. By the time they reached the ranch house, darkness had fallen. The old lantern by the door flickered weakly in the wind. Ellie ran out onto the porch before Rhett could even dismount, her small form swallowed in an oversized sweater. "Papa, you're drenched." "Who's that?" she called, eyes wide with curiosity. Rhett swung down, helping the woman off the horse. "This is Miss—" He paused, realizing he hadn't asked her name. "Clara Bennett," she supplied softly. "Thank you for stopping, Mr.
Callahan," he said simply.
Rhett Callahan. Inside, the warmth of the hearth hit them like a blessing. Rhett stoked the fire while Clara stood awkwardly by the door, dripping water onto the wooden floorboards. Ellie's gaze never left her face. The woman smiled gently and knelt down, her eyes level with the child's. "Hello there," Clara said. "You must be Miss Ellie. Your papa told me you've got a fine ranch here." Ellie blinked, then smiled shyly. "You smell like roses," she said, nose wrinkling as she sniffed the air. "Like Mama's scarf." Rhett froze where he stood, poker still in hand. Clara looked up startled, and for a second something unspoken filled the space between them. Something that tightened Rhett's chest in a way he hadn't felt in years. Clara's cheeks flushed. "That's very sweet of you, darling," she said softly. "Your mama must have had wonderful taste." Ellie grinned as if she already knew some secret Rhett didn't. "Mama liked roses best." Rhett cleared his throat, turning back to the fire. "You can take the spare room upstairs," he said shortly. "Ellie, fetch some blankets." Clara murmured a thank you and disappeared up the stairs a few minutes later. Rhett stood for a long time by the fire after she was gone, the crackling flames painting golden light on the walls. He couldn't shake the image of her eyes, warm, uncertain, but kind. When he finally turned in for the night, Ellie was already asleep on the sofa, her mother's scarf tucked under her chin. Rhett bent to kiss her forehead. In her sleep, she mumbled something that made his heart twist. "She smells like Mama, Papa." Rhett straightened slowly, eyes fixed on the darkened stairs. He didn't know what kind of woman fate had sent to his door tonight, but for the first time in years, the silence in the old house felt different. Not empty, not mournful, just waiting. The next morning dawned pale and golden, the rain clouds finally spent. A thin mist still hung over the pastures, curling around the fences and drifting like a ghost over the wet earth. Rhett Callahan rose before the sun, same as always, though his mind was anything but calm. He'd barely slept. His thoughts kept circling back to the woman sleeping under his roof. From the kitchen doorway, he could see her through the parlor window. Clara Bennett stood on the porch, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, watching the sunrise. Her hair, freed from its braid, fell loose down her back, gleaming chestnut in the light. She looked both lost and peaceful, like someone trying to remember what belonging felt like. Rhett turned away before she could notice him staring. He told himself it was just decency, but truthfully it was something else, an unease he couldn't name. The house had been quiet for so long, and now her presence stirred old echoes. A woman's footsteps in the kitchen, soft laughter in the hallway, the sound of a lullaby once sung by a voice he'd sworn he'd never forget. He busied himself with coffee and biscuits until Ellie patted in, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her hair stuck up like a tumbleweed, and she yawned wide enough to make Rhett smile despite himself. "Morning, bug," he murmured. "Morning, Papa." She tilted her head toward the door. "Miss Clara's outside. Can I talk to her?" Rhett hesitated. "Long as you mind your manners." Ellie ran out barefoot before he could say more. Through the open window, he heard her small, curious voice. "You like the sunrise, Miss Clara?" "I do," Clara answered softly. "It's kind of like a promise, isn't it? No matter how dark the night gets, the light always comes back." Ellie thought about that, then said with innocent certainty, "Mama used to say that too." Clara smiled, kneeling down beside her. "Your mama sounds very wise." She was. Ellie's voice softened. She smelled like roses. At that, Clara stilled. She looked at the little girl, then down at the blue scarf Ellie had tied around her wrist. She recognized the scent faintly. Rosewater and lilac. "That's a beautiful scarf," Clara said. "Did your mama give it to you?" Ellie nodded proudly. I wear it so I don't forget her smell. The child leaned in suddenly, her small hands resting on Clara's shoulders as she buried her face against the woman's shawl. Clara froze, startled by the sudden affection, but before she could say anything, Ellie whispered the words that made the air leave Rhett's lungs. She smells like Mama. Rhett had just stepped out onto the porch, a mug of coffee in his hand. The sound of those 4 little words stopped him cold. The world seemed to tilt, his heart thudding, coffee forgotten in his grip. Clara blinked, her eyes flicking up to him, confusion and sorrow mingling in her gaze. Ellie, Rhett said quietly, voice rough. That's enough now. The little girl turned, cheeks pink. But Papa, she does. Clara reached to smooth Ellie's hair, her voice gentle. It's all right, Mr. Callahan, she's just being kind, but Rhett wasn't sure. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the porch boards and the distant lowing of cattle. Then Clara stood, smiling faintly, though her eyes seemed far away. I should see to your horse. I owe you that much. Rhett nodded stiffly, watching her walk toward the barn. Ellie tugged on his sleeve. Papa, maybe Mama sent her, she said matter-of-factly, as if the universe worked that simply. Rhett knelt down, his hand brushing her cheek. Sweetheart, some things just happen. Doesn't mean there's a reason. But even as he said it, something deep inside him whispered otherwise. That evening, when the sun slipped below the horizon, the house didn't feel so hollow anymore. The scent of roses lingered faintly in the air, and Rhett found himself wondering, for the first time in 3 years, if maybe God hadn't forgotten them after all. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky so blue it looked freshly scrubbed. The air carried the scent of wet earth and pine, and for the first time in a long while, the Callahan Ranch seemed alive again. Clara Bennett stayed on longer than either she or Rhett had expected. The road to town was still washed out in places, and her horse's injured leg needed rest. Rhett told himself that was the only reason she was there. But every morning when he came downstairs to the sound of soft humming in the kitchen, he found fewer reasons to wish her gone. She moved through the house like someone meant to be there. Not like a guest, but like a gentle breeze that had found its way home. Ellie followed her everywhere, chattering, asking questions, holding her hand like she'd known her forever. The house that had once been filled only with the scrape of chairs and the echo of silence now carried laughter again. Rhett noticed the difference first in his daughter. Ellie's giggle returned, the real one, bright and unrestrained, not the quiet hum she used to fill the emptiness with. Clara braided her hair in the mornings, told her stories about the places she'd taught, and let her stir the stew at supper. One evening, Rhett came in from the fields and stopped in the doorway, watching them. Clara sat by the hearth, sewing a tear in Ellie's dress while the girl leaned against her shoulder, nearly asleep. The firelight danced across Clara's face, softening her features, painting her in gold. Something inside Rhett stirred, an ache that wasn't grief. Not exactly, but something dangerously close to longing. He cleared his throat. Stepping inside, she should be in bed, he said, though his voice came out gentler than he meant it to. Clara looked up, smiling. She fell asleep before I could send her. It's been a long day of helping you mend fences, she said. Rhett huffed a quiet chuckle. She mostly handed me nails. Then she worked hard enough. Clara's tone was teasing, but there was warmth in her eyes. Real warmth, not pity. Rhett took Ellie into his arms and carried her upstairs. When he came back down, Clara was still sitting by the fire, her sewing finished, her gaze distant. She looked small there, framed by the crackling light, and he realized how little he knew about her. You said you were a teacher, he began carefully. You heading to the schoolhouse in Silver Creek? Yes, she said softly. Or I was, he frowned. Was? Clara hesitated, fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. I might not have a position anymore. Things didn't end well in the last town I worked in. Someone saw to that. Her eyes darted to the window where the rain had left streaks on the glass. Rhett wanted to ask more, but something in her face stopped him. A flicker of fear, of shame. He nodded instead. Well, you'll have time to figure it out. You're welcome here till the road dries up. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to be kind, Mr. Callahan. I ain't, he said, a hint of a smile tugging his lips. Just decent. That made her laugh, soft and low. Then I suppose I'll take decent. For a while they sat quietly, listening to the fire pop. It wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it was the easiest silence Rhett had known in years. Later that night, after Clara had gone upstairs, Rhett walked through the house, noticing things he hadn't in a long time. The smell of stew still lingering in the air, a blanket folded neatly over the back of the chair, the faint echo of laughter that seemed to linger in the walls. It felt alive again. He stopped by the window, looking out at the moonlight spilling across the fields. He knew she couldn't stay forever. Strangers never did. But as he watched the glow from the guest room flicker upstairs, Rhett realized something had changed inside him. The emptiness he'd carried for years had shifted just a little, and in its place something small and fragile had begun to grow, something he hadn't dared feel since the day he buried his wife. The days passed gently after that. The storm's destruction faded, leaving only soft green shoots in the pastures and a warmth that spread through the Callahan house as naturally as sunlight. Rhett found himself looking forward to the small things. Clara's quiet laughter drifting from the kitchen, the way she hummed while she cooked, the way Ellie's voice filled every corner of the home again. He told himself it was just gratitude. But when Clara brushed past him to set a dish on the table, and he caught the faint scent of rosewater, the truth pressed closer to his chest. He wasn't just grateful, he was beginning to feel again in ways he thought were gone forever. Still, something about Clara didn't quite add up. She avoided questions about her past, deflected with practiced grace, and though she smiled easily, her eyes sometimes went distant when she thought no one was looking. It was a Saturday afternoon when the first crack in her story appeared. Rhett had gone into Dry Creek for supplies, leaving Ellie and Clara to tend the house. At the general store, a man named Jonas Pike, known for his sharp tongue and sharper gossip, leaned against the counter when Rhett came in. "Well, I'll be," Jonas drawled. "Heard you've got company out there at the Callahan place." "A lady teacher, name of Bennett?" Rhett's jaw tightened. "You hear too much, Jonas," Jonas smirked. "You might want to know who you've got under your roof." Name turned up in the papers back east a few months back. Clara Bennett, accused of stealing from the man who ran the school she taught at. Disappeared before the law could question her. Rhett's stomach dropped. "That true?" Jonas shrugged, clearly enjoying the stir he caused. "So they said. Pretty face like that always has a story behind it." Rhett said nothing more, paid for his supplies, and left. But the words followed him all the way home, echoing with every hoofbeat. When he rode up to the ranch, Clara was out by the barn, brushing down his mare, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. She looked up as he approached, smiling the same warm, steady smile that had begun to soften the hard edges of his world. But this time Rhett's heart was heavier than his hands. "Miss Bennett," he said, dismounting. "I went to town today." Clara's brush slowed. "Oh? They said your name's been in the papers." He watched her closely. "That you ran from the law." Her face went pale. The brush slipped from her fingers, landing soundlessly in the hay. For a moment she said nothing, just stared at him with wide, wounded eyes. "It's true," she whispered at last, "but not the way they told it." Rhett crossed his arms, his voice low. "Then tell me." Clara swallowed hard. "I taught in a small school in Missouri. The superintendent, Mr. Grover, took money from the town fund and blamed me when it went missing. He was a powerful man, and when I tried to defend myself, he said no one would believe a woman's word over his." Her voice trembled now, but she didn't look away. "So I ran. Not because I was guilty, but because I was afraid." Rhett wanted to believe her, he did. Everything about her, from the way she cared for Ellie to the honesty in her eyes, told him she was no thief. But years of loss had taught him to guard his heart. "You should have told me," he said finally. "I was going to," Clara said softly, "but every time I tried, it felt like I was about to lose the first place that's felt like home in a long time." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the sound of horses shifting in their stalls. Finally, Clara took a step back, voice shaking. "You've been kind to me, Mr. Callahan. I won't make trouble for you or your daughter. I'll be gone by morning." Rhett opened his mouth to speak, to tell her she didn't have to go, but no words came. He watched her walk toward the house, her shoulders straight, her chin trembling. When she disappeared inside, Rhett stood alone in the fading light, the ache in his chest returning sharper than before. He'd built walls around his heart for years, and just when someone had begun to slip through, he'd found a reason to send her away. But deep down, as the night gathered and the crickets began their lonely chorus, Rhett couldn't shake the feeling that letting her go would be a mistake he'd regret forever. The morning came gray and quiet, heavy with the kind of stillness that follows heartbreak. The Callahan Ranch, which had been alive with laughter only days before, now felt hollow again, like the light had been snuffed out. Rhett woke before dawn, as always, but the rhythm of his chores felt wrong. Every hammer strike echoed too loud in the empty air. The coffee he brewed sat untouched. Upstairs, Ellie slept soundly, unaware that the woman she'd grown to love was packing to leave. From the barn window, Rhett saw Clara Bennett moving about the yard, her travel bag slung over one shoulder. She wore the same shawl she'd arrived in, the one Ellie had once buried her face in and whispered, "She smells like Mama." The sight of it made something twist deep inside Rhett's chest. He'd told himself he was doing the right thing, protecting his daughter, protecting their peace. But as he watched Clara tie her bag to her saddle, the lie of it burned in his throat. Ellie's small footsteps came from behind him. She rubbed her eyes and tugged at his sleeve. "Papa, why's Miss Clara leaving?" Rhett froze. "She's got things to take care of, sweetheart." "Grown-up things." Ellie's eyes filled, big and glassy. "But you said she could stay. You said she was our friend." "She is," Rhett said, voice low. "Sometimes friends can't stay forever." Ellie shook her head fiercely. "Mama sent her." "I know she did." "You can't let her go!" Before he could stop her, Ellie turned and ran out the door, calling Clara's name. Rhett followed, heart pounding. Clara knelt down as Ellie flung herself into her arms, sobbing. "Please don't go, Mama," Ellie cried. The word hit Rhett like a blow. He saw Clara stiffen, her hand trembling as she stroked Ellie's hair. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "Oh, Ellie, I'm not your mama, sweetheart." Ellie pulled back just enough to look at her. "But you smell like her. You make Papa smile again. Mama said she'd send someone to take care of us, and that's you." Rhett stood frozen in the doorway, his daughter's words piercing through the fear and pride he'd built up around his heart. He saw the truth then, not in what Ellie said, but in what he felt. Clara had brought something back into their lives that had been gone far too long, and he was about to let it slip away. Clara gently set Ellie down and stood, wiping her tears. "Your father's right, dear. Some things we can't choose." But before she could turn, Rhett finally spoke. "You're wrong." Both of them looked at him, Ellie hopeful, Clara startled. Rhett took a slow breath, his voice rough. "Some things we can choose, and I'm tired of choosing wrong." He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on Clara. "I went into town yesterday. I heard what they said about you. But I also know liars when I see them, and you don't strike me as one." Clara swallowed hard. "Rhett, you don't have to—" "I do," he cut in. "You don't deserve to run from something you didn't do. Not while I've got two good hands and a name that means something in this county." She stared at him, stunned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he said quietly, "I'm riding to Dry Creek. I'll find proof that man framed you, and I'll make it right. For you." Clara's lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "Why?" Rhett's eyes softened. "Because Ellie's right. You changed this house, changed us, and I'm not letting the only bit of light we've had in years walk away because of someone else's lies." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Clara's composure broke. Tears spilled freely as she nodded, unable to speak. Rhett tipped his hat low and turned toward the barn. "Keep the coffee hot," he said gruffly. "I'll be back before sundown." And for the first time in 3 long, lonely years, Rhett Callahan rode out not to escape the past, but to fight for the future. The sun was dipping low when Rhett Callahan finally returned to the ranch, dust clinging to his coat and sweat darkening the brim of his hat. The day had been long, filled with questions, old favors called in, and one heated confrontation that left his knuckles raw, but his heart lighter than it had been in years. As he rode up the dirt path, he saw Ellie sitting on the porch steps, chin in her hands, the family dog lying at her feet. The moment she spotted him, she leapt up. "Papa, you're back!" Rhett swung off his horse, lifting her into his arms and kissing her hair. "Sure am, bug." She leaned back, searching his face. "Did you find her?" Rhett smiled faintly. "She's still here?" Ellie nodded. "I told her you'd come back. She didn't believe me." Rhett set her down gently, his heart thudding as he looked toward the house. The front door creaked open and Clara Bennett stepped out. Her eyes were red from crying, but her chin was lifted, her dignity still intact. She froze when she saw him. "You came back," she said softly, disbelief coloring every word. I told you I would. Rhett removed his hat, his expression grave. I went to Dry Creek, spoke to the sheriff. Turns out that superintendent of yours, Mr. Grover, was arrested last month. Embezzlement, fraud, the whole lot. Sheriff said your name's been cleared in 3 states over. Clara blinked, tears welling again. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Rhett murmured, stepping closer. Just don't run anymore. For a long heartbeat, neither moved. Then Clara exhaled shakily, the tension leaving her shoulders. I wasn't sure what to believe this morning, she admitted. I thought maybe I'd dreamed this place. You, Ellie. It felt too kind to be real. Rhett's gaze softened. It's real enough. And if you'll stay, maybe it can keep being that way. Ellie, standing beside them, clasped her hands together. Does that mean Miss Clara can stay forever? Clara laughed through her tears, wiping her eyes. Well, I suppose that depends on your father. Rhett crouched to look Ellie in the eye. What do you think, Bug? You want her here? Ellie nodded so fiercely her curls bounced. More than anything. Clara knelt beside them, emotion trembling in her voice. Are you sure, Rhett? I don't want to be a burden. You've already done more for me than anyone ever has. He shook his head. You're no burden, Clara. You're the first good thing that's happened to this place in a long while. Ellie needs you. He hesitated, then added softly, So do I. Clara's breath caught. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the silence between them thick with unspoken truths, the kind that didn't need words to be understood. The wind stirred gently through the fields, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Somewhere in the distance a meadowlark sang. Then Ellie tugged Clara's hand. Mama would be happy, she said simply. I think she sent you. Clara's eyes shone. Maybe she did, sweetheart. Rhett took Clara's hand, rough and calloused against her delicate fingers. Come inside, he said quietly. It's been too long since this house had more than ghosts in it. That evening, as the lamps flickered and supper filled the kitchen with warmth, laughter returned to the Callahan home. Not forced or borrowed, real living laughter. Later, when Ellie drifted to sleep by the fire, Clara tucked a blanket around her and looked over at Rhett. You fought for me, she said softly. Rhett leaned against the doorframe, his voice low. No, I fought for us. And when their eyes met in the glow of the firelight, something settled quietly between them. Not passion's spark, but something deeper, steadier. The beginning of a life no longer haunted by loss, but healed by grace. Outside, the wind swept gently across the plains, carrying away the last remnants of loneliness from the Callahan ranch. Would you like me to continue with Part 8, A Family Reborn, the final 600-word chapter that completes the story? You said ChatGPT said, Part 8, A Family Reborn, 600 words. Winter came softly that year, as if the land itself knew not to disturb the peace that had finally settled over the Callahan ranch. Snow dusted the fences and rooftops like powdered sugar, and for the first time in years, smoke curled steadily from the chimney, not just for warmth, but for the scent of bread baking, stew simmering, and laughter echoing through the walls. The house that had once been silent now breathed with life. Every morning began with Ellie's giggles in the kitchen, her little boots tapping across the floor as she tried to help Clara knead dough or stir cocoa. Rhett would watch from the doorway, coffee mug in hand, the corners of his mouth lifting in a smile that came easier now. He never said much, he didn't have to. His eyes spoke volumes every time they found Clara. Clara had found her place naturally. She mended, cooked, read stories by lamplight, and brought music back to a home that had forgotten what joy sounded like. Yet she never overstepped. Always respectful of Grace's memory, always gentle with Rhett's silence. But she also brought something Grace would have wanted. Laughter for Ellie and light for the man who had been lost too long in shadows. It wasn't long before the neighbors noticed. When Mrs. Hollister stopped by with a basket of apples, she'd whispered, Good heavens, Rhett Callahan. I thought I'd never see the day your house looked lived in again. Rhett had simply tipped his hat and smiled. Guess I had a little help. That help, of course, came in the form of the woman who was now standing on the porch one snowy evening, brushing flour from her apron and watching the sunset fade into a wash of golden lilac. Clara hugged her shawl tighter and looked out toward the pasture, where Rhett and Ellie were feeding the horses. Ellie was talking animatedly, her breath puffing in little clouds as Rhett listened with the patience of a man learning how to live again. The sight made Clara's chest ache in the most beautiful way. She'd spent so many years running, from false accusations, from loneliness, from fear, and now she realized she'd finally arrived where she was meant to be. When Rhett returned, his boots crunching against the frosted steps, he found her still watching the horizon. "Pretty view," he said quietly. She smiled, turning toward him. "It is, but it's not the land I'm looking at." He took a slow breath, the words hanging unspoken between them. Then, with a quiet certainty, he said, "Stay, not just for a while. Stay for good." Her eyes glistened. "Are you sure, Rhett? You've already lost so much. I don't want to—" He stepped closer, his voice steady and low. "You don't take from us, Clara, you give. You brought life back into this place, into me." Tears spilled freely now, but Clara didn't look away. She'd waited a long time for a place to belong, and in that moment she knew she'd found it. "Then yes," she whispered, smiling through her tears. "I'll stay." Ellie's small voice carried from the doorway. "I told you, Papa. She smells like Mama." Rhett turned, startled, but Clara just smiled softly, her heart full. Ellie ran up to her, wrapping her arms around Clara's waist. "Mama used to smell like bread and sunshine too," she said. Rhett knelt beside them, pulling both into his arms. His voice was rough but tender. "Then I reckon we've got a bit of grace still with us." The three of them stayed like that for a long moment, father, daughter, and the woman who had mended them both, while the snow began to fall thicker, muffling the world in peace. That night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered around the eaves, Rhett Callahan finally allowed himself to breathe. No ghosts lingered anymore. No shadows clung to the walls. Just warmth. Just laughter. Just love. The ranch wasn't just a place of work now, it was a home again. A place where grief had turned to grace and where a little girl's whisper had come true. "She smells like Mama," Ellie had said, and in every way that mattered, she truly did.